I want to credit my sources. The following sermon is based on learning I did with Rabbi Eli Kampfer, and he and I actually do know each other. He's not not one of the people that I just watch from afar. Every year on the high holidays, we sing and pray words that can feel distant from our lives. Hamelech Yoshev al Kisei Ram V'Nisa. God is a king seated on high, on an exalted throne. And for many of us, this metaphor of king feels kind of awkward and maybe even troubling. We live in this modern world where we instinctively, at least the way we were brought up, value democracy and checks and balances and shared power. And so the idea of kings belonged to another era. And yet the language of God as king is everywhere in our tradition, in the Psalms, in the daily prayers, in the high holiday liturgy, and we can't simply ignore it. So the question becomes, what does it mean to live with Ol Malchut Shamayim, or the yoke of heaven's kingship, in a way that is meaningful for us today? The rabbis knew something that we often resist admitting. Human beings are never entirely free. We're always accountable to something larger than ourselves. And the Tosefta, which is a text written around the same time as the Mishnah, around 200 CE, puts it bluntly: if you fear human power more than you fear God, then you've taken off the yoke of heaven and instead put on the yoke of flesh and blood. In other words, we always live under a system. And the question is, which system, whose authority, and which values will guide us? The Shema, a central prayer in our services, gives its answer. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the eternal is our God, the eternal is one. Whether or not you believe in God literally, this is a pledge to live by the truth that what binds us together is greater than what separates us. It's a call to build lives shaped by interconnection and responsibility, rather than isolation and self-interest. So the rabbis remind us that we do always live under a system, and the Shema urges us to choose one that connects us rather than divides us. And I know we spoke about that in great detail over Rosh Hashanah. But the rabbis also knew that God's kingship was meant to be different than human kingship. Human kings surround themselves with advisors and armies, walls, and God's kingship is marked by radical openness. And the Midrashim, our rabbinic tradition, draws this contrast again and again. A human king doesn't want to see the poor. God seeks them out. A human king cannot bear to lose. God listens when Moses argues and even accepts being persuaded. A human king reserves his time for the powerful, and God's presence is revealed when someone gives even a single coin to someone in need. So this metaphor that we say on the high holidays of God as king, it isn't just ancient, it's also subversive. It flips power on its head. King doesn't mean tyranny. It means a system of compassion, of mercy, of justice that no human ruler has ever fully lived up to. So God as king is not about domination. It's about compassion. And so the metaphor itself challenges how we think about power. This brings us to today. On Yom Kippur, we are asked to choose again. Whose yoke do we carry? And at first glance, maybe it feels like we live freely, accountable to nobody but ourselves. But the truth is more complicated. We are all shaped and sometimes bound by the forces that pull on us. Our commitments to our family, our work, the expectations of our community, the weight of our own past decisions, and the cultural pressures that surround us. None of these are inherently bad. Many are good, wonderful, and necessary. But they remind us that we are never entirely untethered. The rabbis teach that the question is not whether we serve, but whom and to what end. Do these forces draw us to dignity, compassion, and justice? Or do they steer us toward fear and cynicism and self-interest? And to accept the Ol Malchut Shamayim, this yoke of heaven, is to place a framework of values above all the competing pulls in our lives so that everything else can be held in balance. Yom Kippur reminds us that while many forces tug at us, we can choose to anchor our lives in values that elevate us. For some of us, God language helps frame this choice. For others, it may be the language of conscience, of human dignity, of responsibility to something greater than ourselves, and that doesn't need to be defined. Whatever the words, the invitation is the same. I choose to measure my life by values larger than my own needs. I choose to let compassion guide how I respond, knowing that we all stumble. I choose to believe that what binds us together is greater than what divides us, and to act from that conviction. However we frame it, the invitation is to let compassion and connection shape our choices. And this is where Yom Kippur stretches us. This day is not only about our private moral accounting. It asks us to lift our eyes beyond ourselves, to imagine a wider world in which these values guide not just individuals, but communities, societies, and even nations. Yom Kippur insists that personal choices and collective futures are bound together. And if we can learn to act with compassion when we are wronged, maybe our communities can learn to respond to conflict without cruelty. If we can practice fairness in our homes or workplaces, maybe our institutions can uphold equity without favoritism. If we can recognize the dignity in people we find difficult, maybe our nation can recognize the dignity of every person within its borders. And when we recite the Aleinu during Yom Kippur, in this context, we could hear it in it, not only a plea for God's sovereignty, but also a human hope that more and more people will turn towards these values. Actually, that's what the Aleinu prayer is really about, that like the whole world is going to live by Jewish values. That cruelty will not have the last word, that favoritism will not distort justice, that dignity will not be reserved for the privileged few. The language of Aleinu may be rooted in ancient liturgy, but the dream it holds out is timeless, a world where compassion, equity, and shared responsibility become the standard by which life is measured. And that is not a vision bound to one religion, but a dream that belongs to all of humanity. So Yom Kippur points us outward, to imagine a world shaped by compassion and fairness, not only for us, but for all people. So this year, when we encounter the words, Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King, do not imagine a human ruler with unchecked power. Instead, hear an invitation. an invitation to step beyond the smallness of politics, of ego, of fear, and to anchor our lives in values that will endure. This is the question that Yom Kippur presses upon us. We always carry a yoke, but which one will it be? The yoke of anxiety, division, and self-interest, or the yoke of compassion, justice, and connection? And if we choose the latter, hopefully, even imperfectly, then Yom Kippur becomes more than a day of fasting and prayer. It becomes a mirror. It shows us who we are at our most honest, without excuses, without noise. And if we can see ourselves clearly here in all our flaws and in all our potential, then we can carry that clarity back into the everyday world, where the real work of compassion, equity, and mercy takes place.